unmute. Should we introduce ourselves? I mean, I think they know you, but maybe
Yes, please go ahead.
I'll introduce myself. Okay, so my name is Teresa Shiaishi. I work at the Deaf House as a therapist and do prevention work in the high school, like healthy relationship classes in the high school. And I get to be with all of you here today. I have a background in doing racial justice organizing and activism as well that I bring to this. So yeah, I think that's it for me. Brian, I don't know if you have to do an intro.
Yes, I will. Thanks. Thanks for being here, Teresa. I'm really excited that you were able to help facilitate this. So yeah, welcome everyone. I guess I'll say first too, for those who will watch the recording later, that it's Friday, June 19th, which is Juneteenth. There are some, there's a march going to be happening downtown Port Townsend to celebrate today. And the significance of the holiday is it is the day that the Emancipation Proclamation was read in Galveston, Texas in 1865 to some of the remaining slaves who were there. So there's going to be a march, gathering at 11 o'clock down there. So that's part of the significance of the day today. And I know you all know me, but I'm Brian Richardson, the program manager of Recovery Cafe, Jefferson County, and I'm excited to be doing this training. So because we have more people than we anticipated, how we're going to do introductions was just a temperature check rather than have everyone go around and say their name and who they are and why they're here, which I would love to hear about. But instead, we'll just do kind of like a thumbs up, thumbs middle, thumbs down on just how are you doing right now? How are you feeling?
Or you could chat it if you're not using your video. So that's an option.
All right. Oh, Val, I like that. You got the emoji there. All right. Thanks for the chat, John. Okay. So to start us off, we had sent out a video and not everyone may have had a chance to watch that, and that's okay. But I wanted to have Teresa maybe summarize a little bit of that and help facilitate a discussion about it.
Yeah, totally. And before I say much else, I have really bad hay fever, so I might be sneezing and coughing and blurry-eyed, and so just know that that's what's going on for me. And so I just am curious, no worries if you didn't, but just for me to get a gauge of like how many people were able to watch it, just a show of hands if you were able to watch like some or part of it, just to have an idea. Cool. So it looks like a lot of folks were able to. Awesome. Thank you. So Leticia's really funny. I don't know if y'all also found her quite charming and funny. And I think I just wanted to start out with, it sounds like most people watched it. Essentially, this is just a framework to look at implicit bias, like the way that these different social oppressions and our identities like kind of play out internally and in the world. And she just has a great way of explaining it. And for me, myself, like sometimes it's a little, it's like new words and a new way of talking about this thing, right? So that's perfectly normal if you're like, whoa, some of that is over my head. But she has a pretty cool framework that we thought was like important to share. And how I feel about it is like, she says it way better than I can. So why don't we have her just say it, right? So since a lot of folks were able to watch it, I want to maybe just, well, I guess I'll say essentially one of the major points that she looks at is the way that we have kind of like our individual empowerment, like who we are at our core, our values. And then we have this thing that she calls rank. And that I think, and folks can totally chime in, that essentially is the ways that we play out things like, racism, sexism, like those things are kind of like very deeply ingrained. They were taught to us by the age of 3. And like, they're things that we, like the ways that our behavior plays out according to what we've learned before we were able to make choices about what we learned and didn't learn. And then she talks about this other thing called status. And essentially that's more so like what might be visible behavior that's a little bit conscious. And it's like the ways that maybe power plays out in a way of just more so interpersonally in kind of like how we take up space or don't take up space, but isn't rooted in these like long histories of the way our society works and the mechanics of it. Where rank, I feel like, is really connected to the mechanics of some of these really deep-rooted things in our society and how we act those out even without knowing that we are. So that's like a quick little overview. And I wanted to open it up at first to like thoughts and reactions to that video, because there's a lot of content in it. So if you want to share, you can unmute yourself or go. And if we have a lot of people sharing, we'll start maybe doing raised hands.
I'll just go.
Thanks, Annie.
So one of the things it reminded me of is my like the ways in how I learned to just stay quiet. And so, which is why I'm going first, because I otherwise, like me, like 3 months ago, would have just been like, there's way too many people here, and how like her talk was really packed with a bunch of juicy things. Some things hit me pretty hard that I had to pause and kind of like sit back and reflect. But the main thing that hit me was when she was talking about the little black boy who had gone to school in a white school, and he would say something and it would float and just kind of come down, and then somebody else would say something and it would get all this attention. I've experienced that personally, and yeah, and it finally hit me like that's what that is. And so I've felt uncomfortable and weird and icky and not really been able to put a finger on it, but I think that has contributed in my life, just like having that happen over and over, to me, like being quiet, even though I have a lot to say. I just, in groups of people, I will check out room and I will be very quiet. And I've always wondered why that is. And I think that plays out in that. Anyway, it's just a thought I had about the talk. There's so much more, but I want to let other people talk.
Well, thanks for just going out there and sharing your voice and your valuable words with us. Janice, go ahead.
The one part of the talk that really stuck with me was, it was all great, as Annie said, but the view of looking out and thinking people are side by side, and that, or the 7 generations behind, 7 generations in the future. It was like, especially the side by side one, because I was thinking of it after. My view was more very singular, very, and when you think about, you're trying to talk to people and you're trying to understand people, but you're kind of alone, or you felt alone. But seeing it that way, the way that she described it, was a kind of an eye-opener for me. It was nice. A nicer view. I liked it.
Thank you for that.
Could I that thought that, you know, what we see are these big explosions of reaction, but the reality is that small thump, that drip of constant whatever oppression, you know, that. So I don't want to keep using the word systemic, but, you know, just that little, this is what's really happening, is this constant thing, this little hum that we don't hear anymore. And that's what we need to pay attention to, instead of the big, you know, the news that catches our eye, because that's the thing that happens and then stops, and paying attention to the small thrum instead. And that video was amazing.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you.
It brought up an experience for me. I did not see the whole video. it brought up an experience I had when I was first going to college when I was 19. And I came from a very white neighborhood, and I was going to a school that there was lots of diversity in the big city. And I really felt like I wanted to be perhaps be able to help some Black children in schools, preschools or so. So I started doing some internship in that area. And when I went to be introduced to this group, I was the only white person and everyone was Black. And it has stuck with me how uncomfortable. I didn't know what to do with myself. I didn't know how to integrate myself. And they were not really so much concerned about my presence because they had their group. And I only did it one time. I felt so like, oh my gosh, I'm out of my element. What do I think I'm doing here? Why do I think that I can do this without any training or anything? But when she started talking about that remembrance of that experience where I was the outsider and I was the one that didn't know how to be in this environment, and just was a good experience for me to have as a young person.
Thanks for sharing. Yeah, go for it, Becca.
Something that really intrigued me in the video was she was talking about not announcing yourself as an ally, but instead just doing and being, and then the people who you're trying to be an ally to are going to identify you as an ally or not at some point. And I haven't fully digested that yet. It was a new concept in a way. I think I hear lots of people saying, I'm an ally. I'm being an ally. And I did have kind of one question that came up, which is, is it okay to say, I aspire to be an ally? Or is that also kind of the same thing, and you're trying to insert yourself in a role? Anyway, it's intriguing to me, and I'm still thinking about it.
Yeah, I would certainly welcome other folks' thoughts on this, but my one thought is like sometimes with kind of words, is it okay to say this, is it not, right? And I think part of it is more so the value around that that's more important, of like whether you use the word ally and aspiring to be an ally is just what I'm hearing. Awesome. Maybe I'll read what Ariel is saying. Maybe we just focus on doing the work, the actions of being an alliance rather than proclaiming our allyship, right? And so I think exactly it's the values, it's kind of the walk that you walk, and the words, I don't think it's like oh, don't say that, or else you're phony. But more so just holding those values and walking the walk, also, as Ariella said, and certainly welcome other folks' thoughts. Yeah, go for it.
It's a great observation. It's a great question. And I'm just recognizing some of the advice that I've received from Indigenous peoples who are pretty wise. about the harmony and balance of a situation. And the one that's helping is the one that has the power. And I learned that a long, long time ago. So when we just come into a situation and follow our own true heart and be authentic and be transparent and be vulnerable, then we meet. It's like, yeah, we meet in this equal kind of place, and we make true connection. Otherwise, there still is, and I haven't seen the video yet, but I'm fascinated by what I'm hearing about it. So yeah, guess what's next on my agenda? Anyway, but what it feels to me like what we're striving for is that balance and that true, genuine connection. And so exactly like what you're saying, Teresa, just walk your talk. Your actions are going to speak louder than your words anyway. Yeah, that's my take. Thanks.
Thought I'd offer something that in a lot of ways was talked about in this video, and it's just what was helpful for me when thinking about something like racism is that it's just so much bigger than any one of us, right? I had a professor describe it as it's the water that we're swimming in. We can't always see it because we've always been in it. The process of socialization, like Teresa talked about, happens from birth, and it's through all these minute, small, day-to-day interactions, like the Dr. Nieto talked about in the video with the young Black boy in school, you know, and how much those things compound upon. And it's less helpful for me to label any one person maybe as racist, or even say like that thing over there was racist. Like, yes, like we can have that discussion, but if we think about like actually the culture we lived in is a racist culture, and therefore our institutions are built on that. And when we like create this sort of like critical consciousness, for me, it helps me to maybe not feel so guilty for having the power and privilege that I have. And also, though, important to acknowledge, you know, my position within it and my place within it. So I can say like, all right, in this interaction, let me, in the back of my mind, have kind of like the historical context, or also like the humility to be like, I have no idea what it must be like to be someone different from myself. So I guess in that way, I just know for a lot of other white people that I talk to, that's something that will come up, is like, oh my God, you don't know what you don't know, right? And so then when we were starting to come to this realization, a lot of these feelings kind of come up for us, and rather than, you know, thinking about this thing, we're like, oh, we're gonna blame you and you and you, it's actually this thing that we all do to each other. And so to undo it, we all have to kind of develop this new kind of consciousness.
Thanks, Brian. And Becca, I really appreciate that you asked a question. Oh, Annie, go for it.
Oh, I was just gonna say, like, the subtleties of it, and like sometimes, like, and I've been guilty of doing things and not realizing like how it lands for people or where it's coming from. But there was a story in this book I'm reading about this woman who was working at a Walmart or Target, and she was checking receipts for people as they were leaving, and somebody was sitting and relaxing and observing and noticing that she was only checking the receipts of the Black customers. And when she was called on it, she didn't even realize she was doing that. So anyway, it's interesting, like how like the water we're swimming in, like, oh, like, you know, having that pointed out and not even realizing that, because it's always there. We've all like, I don't know how to word it. Just the way our culture is, like, we do things and we don't necessarily know we're doing them, and you have to like go really deep inside and figure out what's going on. Anyway, I just wanted to add that.
Definitely. Thank you. And I was curious if folks had any questions. It's a lot of content. Like, did anyone have any questions about the video? Yeah, David.
Hey, Yeah, I was very intrigued by what she talked about at the end. She presented, I think, two different images of movement, of movement, and in different approaches that I think she called them agent and target groups could experience or could enact. And I am old ish and forgetful, and I have already sort of, like, that's not crisp in my head anymore. So I'm interested, if Teresa, you may have watched this, or probably have watched it more than once, and I don't really remember the gist of that. I just remember it seemed useful, but she went over it really fast. So anyway, that's my sort of question.
Yeah, she did go over it really fast. I feel like what I know about Leticia is I think she does like lots of like in-depth trainings, and that was like definitely a breeze through like some big concepts. So I think it's not surprising for anyone to be like, what was that? And so I think essentially what it was is often when we talk about justice or oppression, and we talk about the way that shows up on individual identities, there's like target identities and agent identities, and target identities are ones that are marginalized or kind of at the what's a better word, losing, just like that they experience harm from the system. And then agent identities are folks that experience privilege or benefit from the system. And so for the most part, like, and so it lists a lot of things like race and citizenship, whether you're indigenous or not, your gender, your sex, your sexuality, your religion. And so that just these different kind of like these different identities, these different aspects of who we are, how we walk through the world, how we're perceived by the world. And so when people maybe look at that, you could see, usually folks will place themselves as like, oh, where am I on this category of identity, right? And agent or target. And oftentimes it's a mix for folks, just kind of depending on who you are. And this is just a recognition of just like, I think something that she stresses is there's like truth and reality, right? The truth is actually, we came up with all of these, that like that humans, like we made these up in a lot of ways, and we could talk along ways around how these are not actually finite identities, or there's like untruth about it. And the reality is we've been living them as reality for a very long time. And so they have huge life and death impacts even, right? So yeah, I hope that, and I think something we can try and do, there's, I think we're gonna do a follow-up email, and we could probably attach a kind of a visual of that. So yeah.
Thanks.
Something that I might just to jump on some of the things that Teresa's talking about. I wanted to maybe give some examples, I guess, of what does that look like if you're in a target status versus an agent status. And there's lots of different, like Teresa was talking about, lots of different, I guess, polarities that we can look at versus, race, sex, national heritage, language, all kinds of different things, right? But if we're looking at just race or gender as the example, we were actually talking about this in one of our staffing meetings at Dove House a few months back, where our boss is a woman, and her and I will sometimes go to meetings together. And often when we're in those meetings, the questions are directed at me rather than my boss. And I can't help but think that that must be because she's a woman, whereas she's been doing this for decades, right? Like, she's the one in charge. The questions ought to be directed toward her. I don't know the answer. So one way that I benefit is that people automatically respect me, and people automatically think I know the answer to things. So I can walk through the world knowing that I have access to a lot of things that other people do not have, just automatically because of the way I look. So one way that that's not so great for me is that that's a lot of pressure. I don't always like that, it's stressful. And then my response is often that, oh, I better, even if I don't know the answer, I better come up with something kind of on the fly, you know, which is not helpful. So there's the aspect of the agent holding power and the target not holding power. But within this system, we are all harmed.
Can I share a screen for just a second, and I'll show you what I was specifically curious about. It's this thing, and this is, you know, what I'm most interested in as, frankly, a incredibly privileged person in all kinds of ways, is how I can move from, you know, one end of the spectrum to a more useful and healthy end of the spectrum. And this, she presented this model, but it was, God, I'm going to take it back down because I hate monopolizing the thing, but I'm really interested and curious about that.
Cool. Yeah. Thanks for clarifying. Yes, I think that's a really great model, and she just doesn't have time to get into it the way I think that she would usually. So one thing I would say is like maybe looking her up and seeing if you could like, I think she has a book, and like there's probably, to flesh out that concept would be like one step around that. But I think it gets to that question. Okay, so maybe if I'm in awareness, like what now? And then maybe that's like the allyship piece, right? And so, yeah.
There's lots of folks who haven't yet said anything, so I just want to make sure we create space for that in case there is someone who would like to share a thought or ask a question.
I also agreed on the flatline position that we talked about. That stuck out the most for me, where you say something and it's kind of out there and yours flatlines, and then someone can say the same thing next to you, and it's recognized, it's praised, it's noticed. And I've dealt with that quite a bit, which is confusing.
Thanks for sharing that.
I'd like to ask about the video. I don't know about the video. I want to know where I can view it.
I will send it out again in a follow-up. I can also paste it right now in the chat.
Oh, yeah, no.
I apologize if you didn't get it. I had tried to send it out to everyone when we registered, but you'll get to see it, don't worry.
Okay, thank you.
And just acknowledging that this video and the content of what we're talking about really impacts us differently based on what our identities are, what our lived experiences are. So I really appreciate everyone, you know, sharing from themselves, from their experience. So thank you. And yeah, just want to create space again. Glad Sandra and Shirley both spoke up, just to hear from any other folks that want to share.
I thought I'd offer an example of when I have screwed this up really badly in the same kind of thing that we're talking about. I used to be a counselor at an outpatient addiction treatment center, and I would do groups, and so there were all kinds of different people who would be in my groups. And I thought I was good at this, you know. I thought I was like aware. I thought I was, you know, an ally or whatever. So I had this group where we were just talking about how do we cope with our emotions. You know, I was doing some things on the whiteboard, and there was a Native woman in my group who was trying to communicate something to me about the topic that we were discussing. And I wasn't getting it, you know. She was saying something, but it just like wasn't landing. I don't think I quite understood what she was trying to share, you know. And so we just kind of listened and then moved on. And then a white guy in the group said basically the same thing, and then it clicked. And then I was like, okay. And then I I you know, like reframed what he said and offered that back out to the group, and she was understandably upset by that. And I just like saw it all in that moment. I was like, oh no, what have I done? But I still like, I guess, you know, this is just part of my own stuff with this work, right? Is what I wish I could have done in that moment after even realizing I screwed up is to reframe what just happened here, you know? Because you know, I apologized to her, said, I'm so sorry, I didn't understand. Yes, you said the same thing, like that's cool. But the next step beyond that would be to say, wow, let's talk about what just happened, which is that me, the white man facilitator, did not get what you were talking about. And maybe that has something to do with our identities as a Native woman, as a white man, and the power dynamic in this room right now. Because that would be ideally the more empowering thing, rather than I apologized, oh, it's just because you and my relationship as individuals, right? It's a bigger thing than that.
Good morning, my name is Pam. I've heard some really, really great things here today, and actually have brought up some memories for me that one in particular, I think about 25 years ago, I was living up in Everett and in a 12-step program, and about 5 of us women decided to drive down to Seattle and go to a Saturday night meeting down there. We didn't know anything about the meeting. We just picked it right out of the book. And so we all got in the car, went down there, and it was down at 23rd and Cherry, if any of you know the Seattle area. And so it's a very predominant Black neighborhood. And so there was 5 white girls of us jumping out of this van, and we all go into this hall, and you know, there were everybody standing outside was Black, and I immediately felt less than, fear, all sorts of emotions came over me. And because I grew up in a neighborhood in South Seattle that was just a predominantly white neighborhood, and even up in Everett, it was there was not a lot of diversity up there. So anyway, we went into the meeting, and we were the only white people in the meeting with about 100 people, and it felt really awkward to me. But as the meeting progressed, people looked over at us, they smiled, they shook hands. And what I realized after the meeting, we were all talking amongst each other, and that we were really there. The fear was gone. I didn't, you know, I felt comfortable. And what happened for me is that I realized that we were all there with a common problem, and we were there for the common solution. Mm-hmm. So it was just, it's a wonderful experience. I look back on it, and I'm just so grateful that I got to have that, because I've been on the flip side of that too. I was a female, my career, I was in a very male-dominated career, and I was a supervisor. And I was looked through so many times. Men would just be talking, or people would be talking, and they would look right through me and directly look over at a man that was below me in rank. And so I know what that feels like. And I remember having resentment about that. So anyway, this is just such a great topic, and the video was really, really wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
So there were a couple folks who joined us recently. So I wanted to say welcome to Kathy and Celia. And if I've missed anybody else, I apologize. And maybe Liz. No, you were here earlier. So we were discussing the video that I had sent out beforehand. I've put it in the chat as well, in case you've missed it. And Teresa, I want to take your lead on we have another activity and when's appropriate.
Yeah, why don't we transition now? Does that feel good?
That sounds great, yeah. So for those of you who attended our Recovery Coach Academy training in January, this activity will be familiar to you. the main difference, of course, is that we were in person back in January, and this will be virtually. So we've made a modification. So if you've taken it already, like I said, it'll be familiar, but I'm hopeful that with the new context of the Black Lives Matter movement and protests against racial injustice and the killing of many Black people at the hands of law enforcement recently, that maybe this will bring new stuff up for you. And for those who haven't participated, then great, we'll get to do this together. So this is called the Power Shuffle. And what we're going to need is everyone to remain muted for the duration of this activity until the end when we discuss it together. If you're on video, great, because we're going to be, instead of moving from one side of the room to the other, we're going to use our hand to indicate when I ask you to do so. And for those who are not on video, you have the option of using a reaction, which is a button on the bottom of your screen on Zoom. And you can use let's use the thumbs up sign. If you're having trouble finding that, then you can write something in the chat. So I'll explain a little more and it'll make sense why I'm indicating about these things. So we've been talking about power and privilege in this training already, and we experience these things in different ways, right? The vast majority of us at some point in our lives have found ourselves in a power group and in a non-power group. So this activity is going to help us explore that a little bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read out different identities or different experiences that we may have had in our lives. And at the end of each one, I'm going to just ask you to kind of reflect on what's happening. So when I say one identity and you identify as that, then I'm going to ask you to just raise your hand silently. And I'm going to ask you the question every time. I'm going to say, just notice who is with you, notice who is not, notice your feelings, and then you can put your hand back down. Okay? Is this making sense? Does anyone have any questions before we begin? Okay, Betsy, great. I see your hand. Yes.
Okay, go ahead.
Nope, go ahead, Annie.
Oh, okay. So are we using the reaction hand raise, or are we actually raising our hand? Or does it matter?
If we can see your video, just go ahead and actually raise your hand. If you're not on video, that's when we can do the reaction. Sound good? Okay.
Ryan, you saw my hand?
Yes, I did. Thanks.
Okay.
Okay. So here we go. We're going to start with the first one. So again, raise your hand if you identify as this. You are a woman. Notice who is with you. Notice who is not with you. Notice how you're feeling. And now you can lower your hand. You are African American, Afro-Caribbean, or Black, or of African descent. Notice who is with you. Notice who is not with you. Notice your feelings and lower your hand. You are Asian, East Asian, Indian, or Pacific Islander. Notice who is with you. Notice who is not with you. Notice how you're feeling and lower your hand. You are Latinx or Chicanx. Notice who is with you. Notice who is not with you. Notice how you're feeling and lower your hand. You are of Arab descent. Notice who is with you. Notice who is not with you. Notice how you're feeling and lower your hand. You are Native American or part Native American. Notice who is with you. Notice who is not with you. Notice how you're feeling and lower your hand. You are of Jewish heritage. Notice who is with you. Notice who is not with you. Notice how you're feeling, and lower your hand. You are part of a multiracial or multi-ethnic family. Notice who is with you. Notice who is not with you. Notice how you're feeling, and lower your hand. You were raised poor. Notice who is with you. Notice who is not with you. Notice how you're feeling, and lower your hand. Your parents had no college education. Notice who is with you. Notice who is not with you. Notice how you're feeling, and lower your hand. You were raised in or presently live in an inner city. Notice who is with you. Notice who is not with you. Notice how you're feeling, and lower your hand. You or your parents are first-generation Americans. Notice who is with you. Notice who is not with you. Notice how you're feeling, and lower your hand. You or anyone in your family has ever been treated for mental illness. Notice who is with you. Notice who is not with you. Notice how you're feeling, and lower your hand. You have a visible or hidden disability or impairment. Notice who is with you. Notice who is not with you. Notice how you're feeling, and lower your hand. Your parents were considered unskilled labor. Notice who is with you. Notice who is not with you. Notice how you're feeling, and lower your hand. You or anyone in your family identifies as part of the LGBTQ community. Notice who is with you. Notice who is not with you. Notice how you're feeling, and lower your hand. Your native language is other than English. Notice who is with you. Notice who is not with you. Notice how you're feeling, and lower your hand. You came from a family where alcohol and/or drugs was a problem. Notice who is with you. Notice who is not with you. Notice how you're feeling, and lower your hand. You have ever been unemployed, not by choice. Notice who is with you. Notice who is not with you. Notice how you're feeling, and lower your hand. You or a member of your family has ever been incarcerated or been in the juvenile justice system. Notice who is with you. Notice who is not with you. Notice how you're feeling, and lower your hand. And this one is our last one. You were raised by a single parent. Notice who is with you. Notice who is not with you. Notice how you're feeling, and lower your hand. I want to give us just maybe 30 seconds after having done that activity to just sit in silent reflection, thinking some more now that we've gone through all of those different identities and lived experiences, how we felt about our membership in either a power group or a non-power group. So we're just going to sit here in about 30 seconds of silence. Thank you everyone for doing that. So I know a lot comes up for people when we do this. It may translate differently virtually than in person, but I want to open it up to any thoughts, reflections, or feelings that people had as we did that activity.
O'Brien?
Go ahead, Betsy.
I experienced prejudice of religion. I'm Jewish. People would say things to me like, you don't look it. We don't associate with people of your religion, or considered me, would label me those people. So I experienced that as a child, and I've learned to just kind of be quiet about my religion, because I'm uncertain how people will react. I did vocalize with a group of friends once. I was with a bunch of girlfriends, and we were playing our bunco game. And one of the girls said something that was against Jewish people, and I did speak up to her. And so I have experienced that through my whole life. And yeah, that's about it.
Thank you, Betsy.
Uh-huh.
So Brian, this is a really good exercise to allow people to become a little more conscious of the types of groups, the grouping of people that separates us one way or another. And we don't think about it very often because some of those groups that you mentioned are not as obvious as others. For example, someone in your family, you or someone in your family has a mental illness. People don't talk about that, but it certainly affects how they behave and how they respond to other people. So your list of groupings forced us to look at the different ways we have of separating ourselves from each other, or finding those things in common with each other. So that in itself is just a good exercise.
Thank you, Val.
Brian?
Go ahead, Sherry.
Okay, thanks. Sorry. The need for belonging and the sense of belonging. I learned a long time ago that that's a very basic need. That's a very foundational need for every human, to feel a sense of belonging. And the first question, being a woman, and then I looked at the gentlemen that are here, and I thought, I don't know, I felt this little bit of, I wonder, I want them to feel like they belong. So there was some empathy there. There was also some shame, big time. And a couple of them I didn't raise my hand on because I still, but that was very helpful as she said, in bringing it to the forefront, the shame or the embarrassment over mental illness in the family and family members incarcerated. I didn't raise my hand. I was still too embarrassed to do that and to make myself that vulnerable, but I'm doing it now. But so exactly, all of those social mores, let's say that one, that prevent us from connecting. And it's wonderful that we have the opportunity here to look at that and to make changes in ourselves and in the collective, like you were saying. Great exercise.
Thank you, Sherry. There's a lot in your reflection, and one thing that I wanted to point out for the whole group, just to kind of name it, is this, I think it's a relatively common thing for or members of target groups to kind of caretake to the agent group. You know, when you had said, when us men didn't raise our hands, you know, I want you to belong. And you have such empathy, you know, which is great. And also that's the work that all of us agents have to do, to you know, we're not fragile, you know, like we can take it, right? And one of the pieces that we can send you guys later is Robin DiAngelo's White Fragility, which talks about some of those things. Shirley, you had wanted to share?
Yeah, this has brought up, all this race thing has brought up something that I did, and I'm still embarrassed about it. I didn't act on that embarrassment. I swallowed it, but I was just incredibly embarrassed. This is what happened. I was working at Harborview in Seattle, and I was on the shift that I got out of there about 12:30, 1 o'clock in the morning. And I was working 3 days a week, and so let's see now, let me get it together here. So I got out about 1 in the morning, and I was riding my bike I was working 3 days a week and living in Port Townsend. And so I rented a room from one of the night nurses, a Black woman that I liked a lot, and so we worked it out. And so I would ride my bike up to her house. Well, being a Black person, she was in a Black community. And I was a little nervous. And of course, the security people were after me all the time to not do it. But I didn't want to not do it because of fear. And so I didn't have any fear generally, I thought. So I'm riding up this hill on my bike, and I come to just about the top of it, and there's 4 young Black men coming towards me. And I hope I'm forgiven. I thought immediately that I was done for. I thought that they would harm me, be mean to me, steal my bike. I thought all of those things. But I didn't know what to do. And so I just kept riding. And I got up the hill, and then it went down. And so I took my feet off the pedals and just let my bike take me. And I thought, well, I'm just going to turn it over. I can't help what's going to happen now. So I did that. And because the slope was downwards, I went a little fast. And these guys parted and smiled and said, "Hey, how are you doing? Yeah, it's late for you to be out. That's a great looking bike. We'll have a great time, okay? Nice to see you." As I swished by them in my bike. I didn't have time to say anything, and I was so stunned that my whole idea of young Black men in the dark was just blown to hell, that I couldn't even think. So I got home, or to her house, and then the embarrassment hit me and the shame for me. And it was pretty awful at first, but then I realized that's how I was raised. That's one of the messages of my childhood, because no Black can be trusted. They're all out to get you in some way. They'll harm you, they'll rape you, all those terrible things. And so that began my project, I guess, to be very, very kind to everyone, but especially Blacks. And I was apologizing each time that I did it. I didn't say that.
I wanted to stop. When I realized what I had done, I wanted to stop and turn around and say, hey, you guys, come back. I've got something to tell you. But it was a whole combination. I was afraid to, because of opening up my shame to someone else. And I didn't know how they would respond. I didn't know if that would be even more insulting. And so I didn't do that. But ever since then, I have silently said that. And here in Port Townsend, I mean, I didn't even see a Black person. I was raised in Spokane. I didn't even see a Black person until I was in high school. And so I had no way to learn, or I had no knowledge. So, and of course, Harborview is full of Black people, but as patients, as workers, as visitors, as families, and I apologized to them silently. So that's my story.
Wow.
Thanks.
Thank you so much for that, Shirley. Thank you for modeling sharing something that was really difficult for you. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Annie, I think I saw you earlier.
Yeah. First of all, thank you, Shirley, for sharing that vulnerable story. And it just reminded me that I still have a lot of work to do on my gender bias, because if I see a group of men at night, no matter what color, I'm like, and that's my stuff. And so, yeah, I'm noticing that. But back to the exercise that we did, there were a couple of categories where I was the only one. And I had this like feeling of loneliness, and it was just like, oh, it was the Latinx and Native American. And it's interesting because I grew up in a predominantly Hispanic community, a lot of like second and third generation Mexican Americans. And it was like all I was surrounded by it. And there was a way that we like interact with each other that I noticed that upon moving to this community, that was a part of myself that I stomped down, because there's not a lot of Hispanic people in this community. And I miss it. And so I've been like, I kind of like mute that part of myself, or, I try to not be so loud. And I try, like I just did the neck thing. I try to not be loud, a loud Latina, because I'm like embarrassed by that or ashamed of it in this community. But it's something that I've noticed over time. And yeah, so that exercise brought that up for me. It's really interesting that I would mention it.
Thank you, Annie. Go ahead, Elizabeth.
In kind of response to that, every time there was someone who was the only person, or there were only 2 or 3, I immediately was like, oh, I want to go and let you know I'm with you. I'm not with you, but I'm with you. And that whole thing that Dr. Nieto was talking about, like, ooh, how do I insert myself into that community really smoothly, even though I don't belong there, is kind of what I'm working on. Like, oh, how do I join this Black Lives Matter group when I'm not Black? How do I lived in kind of predominantly Hispanic neighborhoods, but I'm not Hispanic. And how do I, without being gross, like, oh, I want to belong too. But also to check my privilege, because it was like, oh, you're like with the men, oh, I don't want you to feel left out. But that puts you at kind of a, like, oh, you need my whatever to feel like you belong. And that's not right. That, that puts me at the agent, and that puts you at the target. And that's uncool. So working on that.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Mm-hmm. Yes, Sandra.
I just really want to relate to one of the shares where they said they kind of like bless them in private because they don't know how to go about it. And they apologize in private because they don't know how to say something. And I'm really looking forward to figuring out how that can be approached and just feel the way that we all, can feel kind of like that desire to appear, to create that connectiveness. I feel like it's a matter of finding and that connection to be made feels really important, and it's probably happening on all the sides that were mentioned. That, you know, like, hey, how do I partner with you, or how do I support you, you know? I thought that was really great.
Thank you, Sandra.
And I just want to real quickly say that I'm going to be logging off here in about 5-ish minutes to go to the rally. So if you see me disappear, that's why.
Second.
Awesome. That's great. Full support for folks that need to do that.
Yes, Kat?
Myself. Hi. I guess I want to go to the rally march talk too, but and I've been silent, just listening. I think today is a lot more of listening, but so, you know, I'm going to have this book study, and it's starting today at 6 p.m. And I'm sure if you're interested, I can put something up somewhere here. I guess I'm not sure if I can do it quick enough. Centered around White Fragility by Robin DiAngelo, and I may be doing it again. So if everyone comes, there's going to be about around 10 people. And the reason why it came out is, you know, I'll do a short story. I was told I was racist on social media, and what I had said was, she had said was, a Black woman said that white people need to go organize themselves. They need to educate themselves, not up to us. And just being called that just shook me to my fragile little bones, because I had a certain perception of myself being, you know, progressive, liberal, and yada yada. But since that time, 2 years ago, I've tried to read more, educate myself more. And then I came across this book, and the book I was having a hard time with. And I think a lot of the reasons why I was having a hard time with it was because it was addressing things that I did not like to look about myself. You know, I have a certain perception of myself as a human being. And so I started to read it again recently, and I went, wait a minute, I need help. I need to listen to what other people are going through. And as I read the book, it shook me even more. And I'm like, I'm not the only one. And the deal for me too is, you know, I'm lost of words, really. And I want to be in that place of being humble, that I don't know. When I'm in that place of I don't know, I want to listen. I feel like I'm more true to being an ally when and I hate to say this, but shut up and listen, and not be in front, not be behind, but stand beside. And stop being so fragile into this, because people are dying, and we need to know, we need to understand. And it's not understanding what racism is in the sense of what Black people and Indigenous people and people of color, you know, what they've had to go through so much. That is something I need to understand, but it's understand my own indoctrination, you know, of racism, and how subtle it is, and how viciously subtle it is. And so the more I read in this book, the more I see patterns, and it's of what people say, and I'm really shocked how much, in a good way. It's really quite eye-opening. So that's all I have to say. But I can put it in the chat if I can get to it, the link. You're welcome to come. I may do this again in the future through the cafe. This is done by myself, independent, but it's one way I feel empowered to do something. is to begin dismantling racism.
Oh, thank you, Kat. That's great. If you do want to put it in the chat, go for it. If you don't get to it and you want to send it to me, I can send that out in email to everyone as a follow-up as well.
Well, I'm wondering, one question is how this applies to Recovery Cafe, right? This is like, we're talking about it in these big ways. And also these really, I appreciate folks like really just being vulnerable about the way it shows up for them individually. And there was a lot of that today as well. And just to kind of contextualize it to Recovery Cafe, you know, if folks have ideas about how this might show up and why this is important and relevant in specific to Recovery Cafe.
Hi. I see Recovery Cafe as a hub for making contributions, huge contributions to evolving the collective consciousness and to maybe even shifting into a more egalitarian type of life and lifestyle. And there's so much difference between love that supports and helps people to heal and gives people freedom to grow, and distorted love has to do with control or power over or domination or attachment. And there's just, as far as specific things, I can see, you know, sharing this video and having these types of conversations around a table. And a place where people can come into. I said this about Recovery Cafe to a gentleman who's very interested, a community member. What's going on over there? What is that place? And I said, it's a place where people can come in and be treated like a human being, maybe for the first time in their lives. So it's pretty darn thrilling. I'm really happy that we're going to have this resource here in our lovely little paradise community. Yeah, pretty exciting indeed.
Thank you, Sherry. Well said.
Someone said something in one of our recovery circles. It is about recovery. This is about recovery. You know, it is about recovery. I don't have anything else to say. That's it. We're recovering who we're supposed to be as a unified, you know, human race. You know, you know what this, it feels like brainwashing. It just, that's what and it's undoing the, you know, colonial brainwashing from hundreds and hundreds of years. It's recovery, you know, to be the human being that we need to be, and for the generations to come. We need to lay that foundation. So off the soapbox now.
Thanks, Kat. So a similar framing of this question, you know, is how does this apply to the Recovery Cafe? Yes. And what do we do next? What do any one of us do next? And I think it's a good question that a lot of people are asking themselves right now. And if anyone has any thoughts on that, I'd love to hear it.
Brian, take a shot at that one. I have a very unstable internet. That's why I keep my video off. And sometimes everybody freezes up. But this does have a lot to do with the Recovery Cafe. As was just said, you know, we're trying to recover as to who we really are as the human species. My thoughts are, you know, we've learned some norms that should never have been norms. And I know when I look back, I was growing up I was an immigrant in a poor neighborhood outside of New York City. And I didn't understand racism because I played on the street with every color, Black, Hispanic, the whole 9 yards. So it took a while for me to get a handle on what it was. And it wasn't until I got drafted into the Army that I started to recognize more of it. But I think we need to take what learned here and what that, you know, that video, it's something that you sent out. It's something that I watched it. I know that there's a lot there that I probably did not absorb in the first time, and I need to go back over it. And this is just learning how to treat everyone, no matter who they are. You know, treat them as if you can't see them, just hear them, and use that inside what you've learned here to represent yourself differently to everybody and be colorblind about it. You know, remove, and I have prejudices, I know I do, and I know why, and I work on those. But it's something we need to learn to get to that balance where, you know, we're less afraid of people that are different, because the fear is what creates more of the problem. And other people not have fear. So I've been very uncomfortable with some of the things I had to raise my hand on and this and that. I have a diverse history as, you know, growing up. As I said, we were a poor immigrant family. I worked my way up. I was a draftee. I was in combat in Vietnam. So I have a lot of things in my life that's gone on. And, you know, the disability, you wouldn't see it looking at me, but then if you hang around me long enough, you might see it come flaring out. But, and those are uncomfortable times later on for me.
Thank you, John. I appreciate you leaning into this stuff. And I want to just offer a reframe on the colorblindness comment, because I think it's really well intentioned where that comes from, you know? And part of the reason why we do the power shuffle is to not cause divisions or to otherize anybody any more than they are, but to acknowledge and honor the differences that do exist. And when someone is telling us that they have a different lived experience than we do, then we hopefully will listen to that. When we say something like colorblindness, or I don't see race, or I don't see color, or something like that, that's negating an important identity that someone might have and makes it so that we might not understand their experience. I saw both Janice and Shirley. How about we do it in that order? Janice, do you want to go?
Yeah, I was just going to comment on when we did that exercise, the thing that we, someone said, I think Val said, about how mental illness is like nobody ever wanted to discuss that in families. That was like the elephant in the room for me growing up. Everybody I knew, there was some kind of mental illness going on in that family, but nobody ever talked about it. It was just secret code, or it came up at times and you couldn't pretend like it didn't happen, but never had conversations on mental illness or what that was doing to the different people. But when we did that test, almost everybody raised their hand. So it's like we all, it's something we don't really have a difference in. We're all related in that way. It's touched so many lives, and it's not just because we're in recovery. I think it's just a human condition, you know, that us at this time in our life, a lot of people have experienced mental illness in some way. So it's something we all relate to. Anyway, that was all I was thinking of. Thanks. It was really good listening to everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Janice. And Shirley?
Okay. You said earlier, or somebody said that, why is this racism discussion what does it have to do with the Recovery Cafe? The Recovery Cafe, I think I've heard it from several people, but you, Brian, is the one I remembered it from, was everybody is recovering from something. So everybody means everybody. And everybody is recovering from something. So that something is to do with everybody. And what we're recovering from are attitudes learned and addictions happening, sadness, mental illness. I mean, we've all got it all in some form or another because of how we were raised. And so it's an inclusive thing. Racism is awful. And to subject anybody to being a less or a lesser is wrong. And so that's what recovery is. It's like what alcohol does to you and drugs do to you and bad parents do to you and all that. That's what we're recovering from. And Lord knows my story shows that I certainly need recovering. And I'm working at it all the time. I wish I lived in a community that had more Black people in it. But I never see them. They're not, there's a few in Port Townsend, but not many, and I don't know them. And also maybe they could do a little bit. I think the laws and the attitudes are changing in some way, that neighborhoods are opening up that weren't open before. And I hope that continues. I'd love to live next to a Black person, a Black family. I love little Black kids, and I mean, they're just people, damn it. So I have gained quite a lot, but I know I still have some, because the raising doesn't go away very easily, what you learn when you're little. So at any rate, I just wanted to say that it absolutely belongs with the Recovery Cafe. Thank you.
Thank you, Shirley. Well, Teresa, I might ask if you want to kind of wrap us up here.
Yeah. So, I think a really normal question after these vulnerable and just kind of like deep, big conversations is what next, right? We're kind of like consciousness raising in the moment in this training. And then it's like, okay, so now what do I do with this? Which is like what you're doing now is what you do with this, right? Just continuing this process. A lot of this work, as so many people have said, is this unlearning what we learned before we knew, right? Before we even have consciousness and remembering of learning. And so really appreciate Kat inviting an anti-racist reading group, because doing this with other people can be so helpful, because we have our blind spots, right? That's why they're there. And so to do this with other people can be really helpful. So thank you for that, Kat. That's a great opportunity to continue this. And then I wanted to mention a couple organizations locally. There's a lot of nationally, but I figured I would just start with like local, a couple organizations that are really, I would say, at the front of doing racial justice work. One is the Jefferson County Anti-Racist Fund. It's a reparations fund in which people can donate directly to this fund, and then the finances of that fund are given to Black, Indigenous, people of color for a litany of different things, like especially during COVID-19, right? The focus is like meeting basic needs in this really hard time. But it's this idea that we live in this system that sometimes we get benefits, we get money, wealth, not because of, yes, hard work, but also just like understand our positionality, and that to kind of directly share that with others. So we'll include that in the follow-up email. And then there's also the Port Angeles Racial Justice Collective. It's based out of Port Angeles, and I believe there's a Jefferson County, Chimacum Creek group as well, and they've been organizing for several years just around having kind of discussions like this, teach-ins around this, and then also organizing things from protests to doing education in the schools, just different ways to kind of address individually and systemically racism locally. And then there's also Jasira, Jefferson County Immigrant Rights. Oh my gosh, someone else could probably help me. And we'll, all of this will include, but have been doing really awesome solidarity and allyship work around immigrant folks in our community locally in Jefferson County. So those are like 3 organizations that I feel like are really committed to this work and doing it. So if you're interested, getting involved with them is a great idea. And then also the continued study, I think what we'll do is in that email, send, thank you, advocates, that's the word, thank you. And we'll send a list of like some different books to maybe read and continue, and like Leticia's website, these different resources to just kind of continue the unpacking for yourself and with others. So yeah, that's what I have. And I think as we do this, remember that this is really hard work, hard stuff. I think the power shuffle can leave us feeling all kinds of ways. So just like take care of yourself in this, right? It doesn't do us to kind of like go down a rabbit hole of feeling badly about these things, like that we can take that and move forward, that we can take that, normalize all the feelings that come up, but also remember that the best that we can do is keep trying.
Thank you so much, Teresa. Well, we're going to get you guys out of here on time. So thank you all so much for participating today. We'll continue to do our monthly trainings until further notice on Zoom. And we will have one, I'll send out some more information, but the one in July, the second Friday of the month, will be about group facilitation and recovery circles. So that'll be for folks who are maybe interested in learning how to do some of those things. And I'll keep you informed about how to register. Doing it via email was only okay for me, so I'm going to try to figure out a better system. Thank you again so much, guys.
Thank you all.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks.
Thanks,
everybody.
Brian. Thank you, Teresa.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
For everyone coming.
See you next time.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Call.
Bye-bye.
Okay. There we go. I guess I can stop recording.